He laughed when he first saw her. Not a kind laugh, not one filled with surprise or curiosity, it was the kind of cruel smirk that rich men wore when they thought they owned the world. Ethan Cole, a billionaire tech entrepreneur known for his arrogance, stared across the restaurant table at the woman sitting nervously before him. "That's what you chose to wear," he said, unable to hide his mocking tone. "It's unique." The woman lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her plain, pale blue dress. "It's the best I could find," she whispered softly, her voice trembling slightly. Her name was Clara. She wasn't the kind of woman who usually found herself sitting across from men like Ethan, powerful, confident, untouchable. She had come because her best friend had secretly signed her up for a blind date, believing that maybe, just maybe, Clara needed to open her heart again after everything she had gone through. But sitting there, facing Ethan's judgmental eyes, she regretted it immediately. Ethan barely looked up from his phone as he ordered the most expensive wine on the menu. Clara sat quietly, sipping her water. She could feel people glancing at them, probably wondering why a man in a $1,000 suit was having dinner with a woman in a second-hand dress and worn-out heels. He didn't ask about her life. He didn't even ask her last name. Every time she tried to speak, he interrupted with some self-centered story about his business, his travels, his success. Then, when she complimented the restaurant, he smirked. "You know, you're kind of brave for wearing something like that here. Most women I date care about how they look." Clara's face flushed. She wanted to stand up and leave, but something inside her told her to stay. Not for him, but for herself. She had spent so much of her life hiding, from pity, from judgment, from memories that still haunted her. Maybe tonight was the night to stop. So she smiled gently and said, "I didn't come here to impress you, Mr. Cole. I came here because I thought you might be someone different." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Different? I'm one of a kind." She nodded slowly. "Yes, you are, but not in the way you think." The waiter brought their food, and the silence between them grew thick. Ethan scrolled through his phone, clearly bored, while Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She could have cried, could have run out the door, but instead, she took a deep breath, reached up, and did something that made everyone around them stop and stare. With calm, deliberate hands, Clara removed her wig. Underneath, her head was smooth and bare, the quiet result of months of chemotherapy. The soft restaurant lights reflected gently off her skin, and for the first time that night, Ethan's confident mask cracked. His phone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the table. Clara met his stunned eyes. "This dress," she said softly, "was what I wore to my last hospital appointment. It's the one thing that made me feel human when everything else was falling apart. I didn't wear it to impress anyone. I wore it to remind myself that I'm still here. That I survived." The entire restaurant seemed to fade away. Ethan's chest tightened, his earlier laughter echoing painfully in his own ears. I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't ask," she replied simply. Her words hit harder than any insult could. He realized how blind he'd been, not just to her pain, but to the quiet strength that radiated from her. For the first time, he saw her. Not the dress, not the wig, not what she lacked, but the courage it took for her to sit there, holding her head high despite the stares. Ethan swallowed hard. "Clara, I'm sorry, truly." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to be. People like you remind me why kindness matters." She stood up, leaving her half-eaten meal on the table. "Because someday, when you lose something that money can't buy, maybe you'll remember this night." She turned to leave, but Ethan reached out, his voice soft and shaken. "Wait, please, can I see you again?" Clara paused for a long moment, then looked back at him. "Maybe someday," she said quietly. "When you learn to look with your heart and not your ego." And with that, she walked out, her steps light, her back straight, her strength shining brighter than any diamond he'd ever bought. Ethan sat there long after she left, staring at the door. For the first time in years, he felt small. All his wealth, his power, his influence, none of it could buy the grace she carried so effortlessly. He looked at her untouched glass of water, at the wig folded neatly beside her plate, and felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. The next day, Ethan called off every meeting. He went to the hospital and made a massive anonymous donation to the cancer ward. But more than the money, he started volunteering there quietly, helping patients with little things, bringing books, listening. He never saw Clara again, but sometimes he thought he heard her voice in his head saying, "Be different in the right way." Months later, one quiet afternoon, he received a handwritten note at his office. No name, just a message. "I heard you've changed. I'm glad. Sometimes pain is the only teacher that speaks loud enough." Ethan smiled as he read it, setting it gently on his desk. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a billionaire, he just felt human. The message of that night stayed with him forever, that behind every stranger is a story you know nothing about, and sometimes the most beautiful people are the ones who've survived the hardest battles. And somewhere in a quiet part of the city, Clara walked through the park with the wind brushing softly against her bare head, finally free from the weight of hiding. She smiled up at the sunlight, whispering to herself, "You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love, you just need to be real." That night, two hearts that began on opposite sides of a table ended up finding the same truth: compassion will always be richer than gold.